Seattle Seahawks.
All right. Welcome on into another edition of Love of the Star. You can get this podcast wherever you get your Odyssey podcast, and we'd love it if you would like, subscribe, tell all your friends about it. Zach Wolchuk alongside the Super Bowl winning scout, Brian Broaddus. Of course, we do have our third member of our crew, Eric Chiafalo. He will be joining us, Brian, for a live edition of Love of the Star. If you are locally in the DFW Metroplex, on Saturday, okay, we will be live at Hurtado Barbecue, their new Dallas location off of South Harwood Street. We'll be there at 11 a.m. We're going to probably do a live Q&A. If you got any Cowboys questions, any draft questions, we'll be hanging out there for about 3 hours, 11 to 2 p.m. We'll record the show. So that's going to be a lot of fun, getting to do a live edition of Love of the Star, Hurtado Barbecue, this Saturday, starting at 11 a.m. I'd love to see all of you out there in your beautiful faces.
Yeah, and well done there, Zach. I think you painted a very nice picture. And yeah, if you could come on out and as you mentioned, we're going to do the show and hopefully take some questions. You know, if we don't get questions on air, we'll surely be around to answer any questions that you might have. So yeah, very exciting time. Hurtado Barbecue, tremendous food, tremendous partner with 105.3 The Fan. And so looking forward to a great Saturday with everybody.
All right, let's talk Cowboys. And the big thing is that this coaching staff's really finishing up here. They're finalizing this thing. And since we last were talking with you on Radio Row, we did get a couple of new additions to this staff. In fact, quarterbacks coach is going to be Steve Shimko, who's been here before.
Right.
But then you've also got your new offensive line coach, Connor Riley, coming over from Kansas State. He, of course, has a lot of familiarity with my dude, Cooper Beebe. Also, the running back as well. Could the deuce be loose, Brian Broaddus? I think that's the number one thing that I saw after this hire was, oh my gosh, does this mean we are finally getting the Deuce Vaughn breakout? But you got another college coach coming in, the wide receivers coach, Junior Adams, who was formerly at Oregon. He's kind of been bouncing around multiple stops, but did a good job with Troy Franklin last year. And this most recent draft, you got Tez Johnson, who we've talked quite a bit about. All of a sudden, does that make him more of an interesting candidate? But what's standing out to you? What have you heard about Shimko? Maybe anything new about guys like Derek Foster, Tyquan Underwood, Junior Adams, Connor Riley? Really good offensive staff shot he's putting together.
Yeah, it is. And you mentioned Simcoe being here. And if you go back to before Simcoe was hired, Boston College, he was the offensive coordinator, and they ran the ball very effectively, though. They had Castellanos, I think, was the quarterback, the freshman quarterback, since his transferred, but they ran the ball very, very well. So he has that kind of that background, the understanding of how to use a quarterback, how to use a running quarterback. So yeah, it's those things are very, very positive. You mentioned about Adams, waiting to hear back for some Oregon people. Heard from some people at some various stops that have been with him. The questions were about how to develop. Has he been able to develop? And I think that's really what you want from your wide receivers coach. You know, the Cowboys are kind of in a little bit of a situation right now where they're trying to find a number two, a clear number two. And for the last several years, we've talked about Tolbert. If you look at how Tolbert's played, there's been some very good. There's been some very not so good. But I think that, to me, this wide receiver coach, very important hire, because you're going to need to find a way to make that room better. And so we'll see how the draft plays out. You mentioned Tez Johnson, the very talented wide receiver from Oregon. Is he now in play? A little bit about his size, as we've talked about, or his body type, I should say, a little bit slighter, but explosive in a lot of ways. So maybe you need more of a guy that could be a true X. And we talk about X, it's on the line of scrimmage. It's the in-breaking routes. It's a lot like what, with A.J. Brown and what he does with the Philadelphia Eagles. You have Smith that has the mobility. You have Brown that has the inside, big-bodied, down-the-field kind of guy. So all those things are going to be to come into play with this offensive staff. You mentioned the offensive line coach. I've said this a bunch. Todd Archer and I have had this discussion before about the most important positions on the coaching staff. And when you start to say offensive coordinator, defensive coordinator, then the offensive line comes right into that slot because, we've seen not just from the Eagles, but the teams that have been able to have success, in the National Football League, they have a good offensive line, they have a really good coach that kind of supports that group. So, Shotty going the right direction. It is interesting to see the college approach that he's taken, and sometimes you get these coaches that are on NFL staffs, and they get set in their ways, and they don't want to learn, and they don't want to adjust, and they don't want to relate to the players as well as they need to. And it looks like that Shotty's kind of gone with a group of guys that are kind of that young, can maybe relate a little bit better, probably lack a little NFL experience, but that's what they're going to have to make up for it with their enthusiasm, their ability to teach, and then hopefully the front office can find them some players to surely coach at a high level.
I think that's the most exciting thing, and we've discussed that on a variety of our platforms, whether it's on the Draft Show, on the G-Bag Nation, on 105.3 The Fan, or right here on Love of the Star, is getting a variety of new ideas. And not – I know they stress continuity, but what Schottenheimer's done with this staff is certainly dipping into guys that he doesn't necessarily have familiarity and a background with. Some of these guys he does, but bringing in guys like we've been talking about, Coach Riley from Kansas State, the new wide receivers coach, doesn't necessarily have a track record of working with them and getting an emphasis on the running game. I know we had Emmett Smith on our show, and, Emmett was very outspoken about Ashton Genty. Not like I don't like Ashton Genty. I don't want Ashton Genty. But if the Cowboys are going to take a premium pick, they need to have a plan for him. And I think that's totally fair, constructive criticism. I've wondered myself, have the Cowboys had a plan? Have they had a vision in place for what they want to do, or is it just very reactionary? It seems like the plan and the vision for this staff is we do want to get creative of how we run the football. We want to put an emphasis on running the football. And Dak Prescott, speaking to the media yesterday, seemed to be all about that. Number one thing that came out of his mouth is we need to improve our running game and how we run the ball.
No, you're absolutely right. And they've come to the realization that Dak's mobility might be limited. We're talking about age, we're talking about injury now. And, you need to be able to tailor that offense around that ability. And I think that was something that in talking to some folks that maybe McCarthy and Jerry Jones agreed on, when they were having discussions about Dak Prescott and what to do going forward, was, hey, you're going to have to tailor an offense around a guy that might not have. I'm not saying that Dak won't run and use his legs, but it's not going to be as prevalent probably as we've seen in the past. And, there's going to be those times where he's going to have to throw from the pocket and make those types of plays. And I think Schottenheimer with with the staff, if they can go out and get the, I don't know with the offensive line. I think there's some things I'm very hopeful with Adams, and the other coaches that are involved, that they do find a way to coach these guys up that you have. I don't know how many changes they're going to make on the offensive line. Maybe they're going to add, maybe they're going to add a draft pick or two. Remember Thomas last year from Louisiana, a guard that we really haven't even talked about at all. What has he been doing in this time when he was basically not involved in the day-to-day operations of going out and practice and stuff? Was he able to get in the weight room? Was he able to get stronger? Was he able to get more flexible? There's some names that they're going to have to probably play with the guys they have, unless they make a commitment to once again drafting a tackle or a guard. You and I have talked about this on the Draft Show on DallasCowboys.com. We've talked about it on 105.3 The Fan. We're not totally comfortable with all the offensive linemen. I shouldn't say we. I should say I'm not totally comfortable with what's going on at the top of that board. I think it's going to be a little bit of a, here's our best guess on this guy, and away we go. So I don't know if Dallas is going to use a premium pick on an offensive lineman. We very well could see them drafting another one at some point in time in this draft, but how it's going to probably come down to, getting offensive weapons for Dak running back, and a wide receiver, and then kind of hopeful that the new coaches can bring the best out of these offensive linemen that are currently on the team.
Cowboys have spent, they drafted Tyler Smith, then Mozzie, then Guyton. So two of the last 3 years, they've spent first-round picks on offensive linemen. How much of that conversation goes into the draft room where it's like, man, guys, can we continue to spend first-round assets at one specific position group?
Yeah, I think it's clear when the quality of the player matches where you put them on the board. I think that's what makes you draft players is that, okay, listen, we've got to, you and I have again talked about the depth at running back. We've talked about the depth at defensive tackle. We've talked about the depth at edge. We've talked about some of the depth at corner. It's a little easier to draft those positions when the quality of the player is there. I mean, it's, Dallas has done some good things back in the day of best available player. The CeeDee Lamb draft was just a great example of, everybody had them taking an edge, and they ended up saying, my gosh, this guy's on our board, the 6th overall player. Let's make sure we draft him. And then Diggs was a guy they even talked about at the time at 17 in the first round at corner from Alabama. And it was like, whoa, we get him at 60. It's just sometimes the draft falls the right way for you, but you don't go in with any conversations of like, okay, we've drafted offensive linemen 2 out of the last 3 years. There's going to be a point in time where we have to stop. If those offensive linemen are better than other positions, then to me, it makes absolute sense to do that. The thing with Guyton is that he was on the tail end of all those good offensive tackles where you picked and, you really liked Barton from Duke. That to me right there, that could have, now it could you have come back and drafted Beebe? But, if you're drafting Barton, you're going to have to make that pick. You don't have the extra third. So to me, it was, you could have, the thing with Guyton, it's about maturity or lack of right now. It's about being a better pro. These things, hopefully, he doesn't have a lot of experience, and that's why he was on the tail end, of the tackle talk. And, they felt good enough about him and his athletic ability to bring him in, but they've got to correct the penalties. They've got to get him on track for being a more mature player. And if those things happen, you get a chance to have, we could talk about him much better terms than what we talked about him this year. But it doesn't affect you, Zach, to be honest with you. It just, you set your board and, where the players fall, that's where you need to take them.
With Guyton, and this might be some of our fault as well, but we have the expectation with how the Cowboys have drafted offensive linemen that they're going to come in and be plug and play and be really good.
Yeah.
Guyton didn't have the same type of collegiate career and resume as some of these other guys did. I mean, really, I think all of us looked at him. We probably had different ways of things that we liked or didn't like, but he was raw. He was a little bit of a project player. The talent is there with Guyton, there's no doubt, but he really only started 1 year at Oklahoma. He was a guy who kind of like pinch hit every once in a while at TCU during his time there. So he hadn't played a lot of football. So I think that we probably put some unfair expectations on Tyler Guyton. And here I am making excuses for the player. He's got to mature. He's got to take it upon himself to be a better pro and to take that jump from year 1 to year 2. But I do think it's probably needed as a Cowboy fan base to recalibrate a little bit of how we view Guyton and not just view him from the same lens as we have some of these other Cowboys offensive linemen, because he wasn't as pro ready as some of these other guys were.
No, you're absolutely right about that. And like we were talking about, he was on the tail end, of whether you thought he was a first round player or a second round player. There were much more accomplished offensive linemen, tackles. To me, like I said, Barton would have made a lot of sense to me there. Just stand there and, but it was important that they got the 3rd round pick. They drafted, Guyton, who they wanted. and they more importantly got BB. So they've got a center it looks like to me. I think you're absolutely right about his ability. I'm looking forward to seeing this coaching staff working with him and seeing if they can get the absolute best out of him, because there were some moments last year where he was really, really, really good. But the learning curve and the learning curve wasn't really steep for him, for somebody that hadn't played center. We saw in training camp some high snaps and some problems that way, but man, it wasn't something that was a big issue going into the season. And the calls, the protections, all those things he seemed very, very comfortable with. So as far as plug and play, him worked out very, very well for Guyton. Maybe some of our fault for talking about him, but the player needs to look at the mirror as well and work harder at his craft.
You are listening to the Love of the Star podcast. Love of the Star is an Odyssey podcast you can find on the Odyssey app or wherever you get your podcast. Zach Wolchuk alongside Brian Broaddus. And again, just want to remind you, this Saturday at Hurtado Barbecue, their new location in Dallas, we will have a live edition of Love of the Star. Myself, Zach Wolchuk, alongside Brian Broaddus, and the third member of our crew, Eric Chiafalo. Maybe we even get our producer Peyton Russell out there. Maybe Pepe makes an appearance, but we'll be doing some Q&A with you. It's going to be a lot of fun. We'll talk draft and we'll talk all things Dallas Cowboys. But now let's slide into our Dean Julia mailbag, where we ask questions from you when it comes to Love of the Star. And some of these questions regard the offensive line here, Brian. Sure. Julian Garcia wants to know, if the Cowboys wanted to move BB to guard, who's the top prospect to draft at center? And we've discussed this, and this is not like last year you brought up Graham Barton. There were a lot of centers we liked, whether it was Frazier from West Virginia. I mean, BB was a guy I looked at him as a guard, but I thought he had the capability to play center just because I loved the player so much. I was like, any way to get him on the team, I'm down. But there was a variety of centers we were throwing out last year in the first 2 rounds. This year, you look at Jake Majors from Texas. But otherwise, I mean, there is not a lot of centers that have you thinking, man, I'm going to be able to draft this guy and move Cooper Beebe.
Yeah, I think this is one of those groups that it's very, very light. USC has this. I mean, I haven't seen, and I've looked at 110 players, and
maybe like what, at 2 centers.
Well, I'm just now studying the center at just now studying or getting ready to study the center at Georgia, and so it's one of those things where you're kind of in that situation where if you haven't seen a center by now, you're probably not going to see a center, and so that's the issues that I'm running into, is that and I mentioned the center from Georgia, Jared Wilson, is who I am looking at. But it is a very, very, very thin group, and there's some people that maybe think that that you could maybe some of these tackle guards. I know Bo, who is people have talked about is he's kind of a lighter guy. When you start to talk about, do you want a guy? How do you want the athlete? This is Marcus Bowe from Purdue, and he's 6'5", he's 300 pounds, but he's a starting right tackle at Purdue, and he's probably going to project inside. He's a smaller guy physically, and you might have to project him even to play as a center. He is a really, really, really good athlete, but when there's not that many centers on the board, you might have to make some projections, and Bo from Purdue might be that guy that moves all the way from tackle all the way inside to play center.
Yeah, I'm with you. I mean, the other guy, and I brought him up because he stood out at the Shrine Bowl, but this is probably a day 3 pick. Thomas Perry's a guy that I've seen.
Yeah.
That's a small school dude. He's a true center out of Middlebury, 6'2", 311. Jake Majors, Jared Wilson from Georgia, who took over. Yeah. This was his first year playing center there. McLaughlin, the Ohio State kid, would be another name. But overall, none of these guys are like, man, I gotta have this dude. And I feel great about moving Cooper Beebe.
Yeah, they've got if you're going to move, and we'll see what happens with with the Brock Hoffman situations and TJ Bass and stuff like that. I mean, we'll see how that all shakes, but I think you've invested a year in Cooper Beebe. Now, unless the coaches come in and the new coaches come in and they say, hey, we think he's a better guard. We project him to play guard. And I'm talking about Cooper Beebe. You probably wouldn't make that move. You'd probably just go ahead and leave him at center. You've already invested the time in him, and there's some quality tape of him playing it at a high level.
Mr. Vallejos wants to know, what areas would you like for Dallas to attack in free agency over the draft? And it's linebacker. And you had an awesome during Krusty's Corner yesterday. Like, you brought up some players and the projected like value versus what they earned and how they overperformed. And I think for us, like as a show, not only is linebacker weak in the draft, linebacker is a big time need because of the overshown injury. But Nick Bolton, Frisco Lone Star, Kansas City Chief, like maybe $15 million a year. Again, this would be the Cowboys going outside of their comfort zone and kind of changing their approach to free agency. But maybe it's you bring back Eric Kendricks. I don't know if he wants to come back without Mike Zimmer here. But Nick Bolton's the best dude on the market for me. Dre Greenlaw also from the Niners, but they probably want to try and bring him back to San Francisco.
Yeah, and you mentioned Bolton, and this was one of my guys from Missouri, several years ago when we were doing draft show stuff, and really felt like, he was a little bit of a smaller guy, but man, he has a nose for the football. You mentioned his value to, he doesn't make, by NFL standards for how well he plays, he doesn't make a huge salary, but his value for the position is about a $9 million player. And so now, are you interested? Now you look at guys like with Oso Digizua, you look at Golston. Now, to the value of a Golston is very similar to the value of a Nick Bolton. Give me Nick Bolton all day. Give me, if you're going to tell me I got to spend, $9 to $12 million on a player, give me Nick Bolton over Golston all day. And to be honest with you, Zach, I think I would take him over Oso Digizua if that was the case. But Osa's going to get paid very, very well. Now, people are going to look at it and say, is this a kind of a one-year situation? He finally got over the hump of like he always wore down in week 12, week 13, and then the other 3-4 weeks he wasn't as good of a player. He fought his way through all that. He became a better player overall for the whole entire season. But now you're talking about a guy is a one-year player. Golston, one-year player. Jordan Lewis has a little bit more of a history there. But yeah, I would look at Nick Bolton very, very strongly if I was the Dallas Cowboys. And I think overall you're going to have to look at the free agents market in the linebacker, because the draft just does not provide the depth that we've seen in the past.
No, it doesn't. And you see some guys, like I'm looking here over the cap, just based on percentage of snaps played. Like, who would be some other names? Obviously, Zach Bond, who just was a massive free agent addition.
Yeah.
Can you find your own Zach Bond? Like Ernest Jones, who's a linebacker out of Seattle. I don't know what the market's going to be for him. Cody Barton played over 91% of the snaps, was good there with the Denver Broncos. Maybe their scouting department evaluates a guy who's not going to be quite as expensive. But absolutely, if you want to know, hey, I'm signing a guy because the fear is you're paying, great money to a good player. I think that's a dude that you're going to be getting the return on your investment in Nick Bolton if you want to go and sign a premium free agent linebacker. Personally.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I think Nick Bolton, he is one of those guys that when he's in the lineup, he is going to make everybody around him better. He's just that type of player. And like I say, a little bit of a shorter guy, but man, you look at his nose for the ball, you look for his ability to make plays. He's played in huge games and been successful. So we'll see. I'd be interested to see. I was talking with some scouts. They haven't had that meeting yet, and now that they have the staff really complete, they could sit down and talk with Eberflus and the coaches and say, okay, what type of players are you looking for? And Flus could tell him, I need this type of a 3 technique or an under tackle. I need this kind of a Mike linebacker. I need this kind of a rush end. I need this kind of a safety. Now they have their marching orders to be able to sit down and be able to. Maybe there's some players that they put not for us, gave them a grade of not for us, and now they have to go back and relook at some players that maybe they were at Nebraska or Iowa or Ohio State that were not for them, that fit the mold of what their coaches want. And so that's something they're going to have to work on right now.
Another question we got here on Love of the Star from John Albrecht. If the Cowboys got wiped out at 12, who are you picking between Kelvin Banks, the offensive lineman out of Texas, and Walter Nolan, the defensive tackle out of Ole Miss? No trading back in the scenario. You've got to pick one of the two.
I would probably take Banks is what I would do. Yeah. And to me, and the late tape on Banks has not been great. And I know there's some people that, are saying, well, Brian, he was hurt. I know you talked about it yesterday on our show, and rightfully so. He was banged up with the ankle, and they probably, but there's some things about Nolan that will absolutely excite you, and then there's things that will scare you to death. And and John asked a really good question, because I think both these players give me pause when they, when you say, okay, if I had to take one or the other, it gives me pause, because I really wouldn't want to take one or the other. Now, I will say this though, put my feet to the fire. Banks, to me, I like the way he fits. I think he could be I think he could play guard. I know people still have him at tackle. We'll see, but I think he's got that kind of ability. I'm not just kicking the kid to the curb, but Nolan, man, I mean, Nolan can fit. Is that 3 technique? I mean, he could, if you lose Oso Digizua, this guy could be pretty good. The problem is, though, do you feel good enough about his consistency? And I think that lacks at times.
I just pulled up my notes on Walter Nolan, and that's what it's all about. It's all like, man, he has good burst off the line, just not consistent enough, right? Yeah. It's okay. He needs to probably add a little bit of pass rush moves. If he gets moved sideways, it's game over for him. He can get stood up. A lot of it is just, you see flash and splash plays, but it's just not a down in, down out. I mean, I would take Banks between the two, but I just have a gut feeling we're going to get closer to the draft, and there's going to be a lot of whispers about the Walter Nolan love in that building at the Star in Frisco. And we are probably going to have a real conversation that he could be the pick at number 12 for the Cowboys, because he does kind of fit the mold of what Eberflus likes from that position as well.
No question. And that's the discussion. And, the scouts that have that area, there's going to be you're right, a big discussion, because you do see, gosh, and I hate the word flash, especially in scouting, because flash means, okay, you saw it, but then you don't see it for 3 or 4 other plays, and at 12, I mean, just give me the best player that's the healthiest, that character-wise is fine, but a guy that I know I could plug in there and I don't have to worry about right now. He's just going to go play. And he's going to be consistent doing it. And I think both those players, Banks and Nolan, lack a little consistency in some areas. Not saying they're poor players, just saying they give me a little bit of that if you're getting wiped out and that's your choices and you can't trade back, well, I'll take Banks in that situation.
Yeah, I'll throw another dart along the offensive line. And I'll say this, defensive tackle, super deep group, to where you might double dip in this draft. Like, if there's a position to double dip, go ahead and do that at D tackle. Because I've got guys in the 5th round that I've watched now that I feel pretty good about when it comes to D tackle.
Yeah, the one technique and the 3 techniques are definitely kind of scattered through the board. Whether it's in that, first round, 2nd round, 3rd round, if you're right, 4th round, you could find you a quality 1 and a quality 3.
Okay, final mailbag question here. And I did Dean Julia, where are you? Okay, I'm looking for you here. Now, I will say I posted this a little late today. I'm sorry. I might not have given you enough heads up, but we'll get you. Hopefully, you come on out if you're in the area. You can come out to Hurtado and party with us on Saturday. Okay, this is from Sal. Are we going to be looking up at the Eagles and the Commanders for years to come in this division now?
You know what? I think that I think that there's things that the Commanders with the cap space, the aggressive, they'll have an aggressive general manager too. From he's from the 49ers. He saw what he saw what his team could do with this quarterback. They got quality at wide receiver. He can improve the offensive line. He's got to get better on defense over there with the Commanders. Sure, I could absolutely this. I believe this is the worst roster that Jaden Daniels is going to play with in his career with the Commanders. I think their roster is only going to get better. And then we all know about Howie and what he will do. Howie every day, and this was my analogy of Howie, and I said this on Twitter, he's desperate. And people think desperate is a bad word. No, he's desperate in a way of making his team better every day. He wakes up desperate to make them better. It's a passion. It's a drive for him. And, the Super Bowl, that just fuels you to try and do more. Okay, that worked. What else can I do? Can I take a different angle? Can I take a different approach? Can I get a different player? His team is going to turn over. They lost their coordinator already to the Saints. There's going to be turnover there. No team is the same. And now the challenge is to try and build a team that was just as good as the one you just had. And Howie, I think, is up to that. So, yeah, the Commanders, absolutely. Eagles, absolutely. Dallas is right now is probably third in this division when it comes to how you're going to look at these teams going into 2025.
Yeah, the roster's falling behind. It's going to take the Cowboys winning this offseason, and the Eagles are coming off one of the best off seasons I can remember in the history of the sport with what they were able to do in the draft. They got impact players in the first 2 rounds to address the secondary. They crushed it with the linebacker signing. And then a lot of the guys had internal growth as well that they've drafted for the last couple of years. The Cowboys are going to need a lot of that, but they're going to have to hit a home run in the draft, and they're probably going to have to do more than just, we hit on Eric Kendricks in free agency. They have so many holes to fill. They've got a lot of work to do this offseason because I agree with you 100%. Commanders aren't going anywhere, and you got the Super Bowl champs in your division now. Now, Dak yesterday did say when he was talking to the media, I feel like we've competed with the Eagles and beat them for the most part when we've played them. I don't want to say check the record when the other guys are holding the trophy, so credit to them. They've earned it, and they deserve it by all means. But, yeah, we're very close, and the Cowboys do. The Cowboys compete well within the division. There's no question about that. Heck, they beat the Commanders once this year. They did lose twice to the Eagles, but when Dak plays filthy, they usually do come out on top. He does have a winning record, but right now there is such a gap to me, again, with the roster. They've got to close that if they want to have a serious chance to compete for the division again. Yeah,
Philadelphia is clearly better at the offensive line. They're clearly better at skill positions. They're clearly better in the secondary. I think it's a little bit closer there. I shouldn't say better, but I think they're better with Cooper DeJean and Mitchell. There, and Dallas secondary's banged up. Their safeties, Blankenship, Gardner Johnson. I could probably replace. That might be something Howie might try and do. But you look at overall, their front seven better than yours. We'll see. Micah's the wild card. Micah gives you a chance here, but yeah, there was a time in June where you might have sat down before the season and said, "They're better here. You're better here. Wash, better here." Now I don't think you can say that. And I think a lot of it has to do with how those players, like, the Smith and Carter and Davis and all those guys, they've gotten better. Those guys were kind of at a certain level, and then they've all elevated their game. And that's really made the big difference. And that and having Vic Fangio as their defensive coordinator has helped them a ton.
You are listening to the Love of the Star podcast. The Love of the Star is an Odyssey podcast. You can find it on the Odyssey app or wherever you get your podcast. Zach Wolchuk alongside the Super Bowl winning scout, Brian Broaddus. I want to wrap up our edition of Love of the Star today. Let's do a mock draft here, Brian. I saw a new fresh post-Super Bowl 3-round mock. Now, this is courtesy of our friends over at Blogging the Boys, but it's some names maybe we haven't necessarily discussed a ton on the show, and it does involve a Cowboys trade. This starts in round 1. You're sitting on the clock at number 12, and the Arizona Cardinals call you and say, hey, we'd like to jump up from pick 16 and go to 12. And they're going to offer you and kick in round 3, pick 78, which now would allow you to have 2 picks in the 3rd round pretty much back to back. You got pick 76 and you got pick 78. So like the Cowboys were able to benefit last year having 2 threes. You get Maris Leofau and you get Cooper Beebe. Those guys look like starters for the future. That's a big like. Now, sliding down to 16, they actually take Armand Membo, the offensive lineman out of Mizzou. Now, this is a guy who I know our buddy Dane Brugler loves. 6'3", 315, 34-inch arms, versatile offensive lineman. He can play guard. He can play tackle. I think his body type screams guard to me. But the footwork and athleticism, certainly he is capable of playing tackle. I think you could plug him over on the right guard spot if he needed to, and he can start for you right away. But I don't know if I would love this pick at 12. I really do like the pick sliding back to 16 and getting an extra 3rd.
No, I think that is, to me, if you go back 4 spots, and then, as you mentioned, that really kind of takes the pressure off losing that 4th round pick or sending that 4th round pick to Carolina. It kind of gives you a hope that, okay, now you're still picking, you're getting 4 players inside the top 100. So to me, and actually 4 players inside the top 80. So that to me would be very, very inviting. That's not a massive drop to go. I think you're in the kind of that range of you might still be in that range of being able to take a wide receiver, Zach. If how interested are you in say Golden from Texas? You're probably in that range of maybe if you like one of these edge rushers. Maybe one of these defensive tackles. I mean, there's good possibilities, like player 12 is going to be right on the edge of your 1st round grades. But then players 13, 14, 15, 16, those are very, right there at the bottom of those 1st round grades. So you're probably getting a player that's pretty close to that. And like you say, a guy like, to me, as I just look at my board and the way that I have it kind of mapped out, that would be Golden. That could potentially be, would you consider, would Banks be the guy right there?
Sure.
If you're in that situation, I have the gut feeling that probably Gente would be gone, but if he's not, boom, you're right there. You picked up an extra 3rd and you take Gente at 16. You're looking at potentially one of these corners or maybe even one of these safeties, so yeah, dropping from 12 to 16 is not a bad thing, especially if you could pick up pick 78.
It's actually I think it's a perfect move if you're able to pull that off. Now Arizona's going to have a guy that they want, and maybe that's not existent, but that would be very nice. In the 2nd round, pick 44, Cowboys get the runner in Caleb Johnson out of Iowa. Now, my biggest fear is the Cowboys end up in a similar situation to last year where they kind of envisioned taking Jonathan Brooks in the 2nd round. Well, what happened?
Right.
Carolina moves up. They take him. Now the Cowboys end up getting wiped to running back. I don't know. As we get closer to this thing, I keep preaching it. I don't know if these runners are going to necessarily make it for you at 44. But if Caleb Johnson's there, I think he's clearly the 2nd best back for me. 6 foot, 225, 3-down back. A physical runner, but he's also got the elusiveness. I think he's faster than Hampton out of North Carolina, which is why I personally like him a little bit more.
Yeah. No, I think you got the players right. And, right there in that spot at 44, I think I would worry about the Cowboys at this point at 44 taking a defensive tackle. I think that if, say, they traded back, say they took, let's give them Golden. Let's just say they took Golden there.
Texas receiver.
So they took the Texas receiver. You're looking at a running back. I wonder if the running back on their board is higher than maybe one of these one techniques, or what I'm saying. I have a feeling that maybe Nolan will be gone. Maybe Nolan won't be gone. Maybe Nolan is a guy because of some of the things that we've talked about. I just wonder if Dallas will covet a defensive tackle, even though it's a deep defensive tackle room. The running back room is pretty deep too. And with the 2 third-round picks, and they're right there next to each other, would they gamble at 76 and see if they could take this thing all the way back? And then all of a sudden they're looking at a guy like Harvey from Central Florida, maybe Junkins from Ohio State, maybe Neal from Kansas. These are all guys that Sampson is a guy that I know I like.
Sure.
Would they just say, you know what, the defensive tackle at 44 means more to us than the running back at 44, and we could take the running back at either the 76 or the 78.
So with this, what happens here at 76 and 78, they fill wide receiver and D tackle. What they do at 76 is they get Isaiah Bond, the wide receiver out of Texas, who in the 3rd round, I'm with you on Bond, right?
Yeah.
But I've got him in the 3rd round. Like
I
think
do
it's
too.
76
I do too.
That's good value for him.
But I've got guys that I like better than him. He seems to be the one. He seems to be the one guy, Zach, when every time I watch a wide receiver and I'm kind of moving my board, I'm looking at it and I'm like, okay, wait a minute, this guy's better than this guy. Bond seems like the one guy that's always
fallen.
As I stack, it's down, down, down. He never is he's better than the guy I just watched. So they went Bond, and then at 76, who they go at 78?
And then your dude from Toledo, Darius Alexander, at defensive tackle.
Okay, see, now there you go. If you told me, then I would absolutely take Johnson at 44 if I knew I could get Alexander at 78. 76 or 78, that would be ideal for me.
Yeah, Alexander is a freak athlete.
But I would, I would do something different with Bond. I just feel like, to me, at that spot, there's going to be, and I don't know, I would take, if you're going to take somebody like Bond, I would consider taking Tej Johnson from Oregon at that spot. If he gets to you, there's going to be guys I know on my board, and maybe a guy like Royals from Utah State is going to be a little higher.
Yeah.
Harris from Ole Miss, maybe a little higher. Tej Johnson, maybe a little higher. Higgins from Iowa State, contested catch monster, but also, though, can't really run, doesn't separate. And I don't know, do you have somebody like that currently on your team with like a Tolbert but I think Higgins is probably better than Tolbert, but it makes are you kind of getting one of the same player that you already have?
Is it the drops with Bond? Was that the big issue for you?
I think,
watched him and there's too many, I was surprised at how many times he kind of gets beat up by the football when I went back and studied him.
He struggles. That is not a natural hands catcher right there. Just not at all.
Yeah. All right. We do want to see everybody on Saturday. Okay. We're not going to have another Love of the Star until Saturday. Eric's going to be working morning show. He's spending some time with the family, but we are looking forward to this. This is going to be an absolute blast. So please come on out with us and hang out this Saturday. Love of the Star going to be live at Hurtado Barbecue, Dallas, okay, 900 South Hartwood Street in Dallas. It's going to be Eric Chiafalo, the great Brian Broaddus, myself, Zach Wolchuk. We'll kick things off at 11 a.m. We'll do a live Love of the Star, hang out with us. They've got delicious barbecue. We'll be there for a few hours, and we'll take your questions. We'll talk Cowboys. We'll talk draft. It will be an absolute blast. So look forward to that. Make sure you like, subscribe, tell your mom, your dad, your sister, your brother, your friends about it. Get those numbers up, baby. Thank you so much. Until Saturday, hugs and hand pounds, everyone.
Yeah, so I'll just have
Thanks, boys.